Okay, let's open in a word of prayer. Lord, thank you for this day. We pray that you'll bless our time together and pray that you'll help us sort through some of these significant events that are occurring in the world today. Bless us today in Jesus' name, amen. Well, I've often quoted from Hemingway, not again that Hemingway is scripture or anything, but he made kind of a clever, one of his characters had a discussion, and the question was, how did you go bankrupt? And he said, well, two ways, gradually, then suddenly. And I think that we see a lot of this week as things happen. I think we're past the gradually part in many cases, and we're in the suddenly part. And we'll talk about some of those things today. So again, I love this graphic I grabbed off of the Times of London. The world's sort of crumbling, and it does seem a bit like that. So look, I'm going to try to not say things today so that people hit the panic button, and I'll know I've failed in doing that if I see a bunch of people get up and run out the door to get in their car to go to the grocery store or something. And just a reminder that our disclaimer here, generative AI was not used in the research or preparation of this update, because I wonder if we sort of took all the events and dumped them into AI and say, hey, what do you think of this from a Bible prophecy standpoint, whether it would, sort of fritz out and that type of thing. So we talk about the convergence of events and these things. Again, the grid that I use, I developed, this is something I came up with on, at least in my own little head. Maybe somebody else did. Acceleration, convergence, logistics, and understanding. There's a logistical aspect to these things in Bible prophecy when it talks about, for example, Ezekiel 38 talks about a great company and a mighty army. Well, how does that come together? So that's in a logistic part. There's a lot of discussion in Bible prophecy circles about, well, what's the final Babylon? So I take kind of an open view of this. There's some that I don't think a lot of, but some people, and by now mentioning some, I'm not saying that these are the ones that I don't think much of. Some people think that Babylon will be rebuilt in Iraq. And that's fine. It may work out that way. I'm not saying that it won't. We'll know when it happens, right? But I'm saying there's a logistics aspect because the Babylon is described as that great city. So great cities are not built overnight. We have an example of Dubai, but it's taken Dubai 40 years to get to be Dubai with some of the biggest, one of the tallest building on the planet. And we see these construction efforts underway in Saudi Arabia with the line, Neom, and then that new Maraba thing that has that cubic look like a New Jerusalem. And so my comparison between what the Saudis are doing and the Babylon in Iraq is there's nothing there virtually. There's a few things, and they're talking about building a big port and that type of thing. But right now, the old site of Babylon is inland, and the river doesn't go all the way. It's because the Euphrates and Tigris are drying up because Turkey's keeping a lot of the water. Turkey has, I think, one dam that's sufficient to store the annual flow of the Tigris or the Euphrates River, just one dam. And they've built a whole series of dams up there, and it's caused a major problem. In fact, there was a story last week that in Iraq, they're having even worse water problems this year than they did the year before. And we know, though, that things like that could change. California was in a major drought until 3-4 months ago. And now look at what's happening. I don't have a picture of it, but I saw a picture in Mammoth, which is a little bit south of Yosemite, ski area, resort area there in the Sierras. And they have like a 35-foot snowpack or something like that this year. And they just showed a picture of the road, and it's like 25-foot walls of snow on both sides of the highway. And this is very unusual. Now they're having flooding over along the coast in Monterey, near Monterey, because of, and they're having snow in lower elevations, so the snow's melting. I mean, it's just incredible, and it's maybe going to be able to recharge some of the aquifers and stuff that have been drained quite a bit over the past decade when it's dry. And that just took place suddenly. It didn't, so these things can change. And then there's a convergence. Everybody talks about a convergence, and we're going to see a convergence of a number of issues this week, particularly in the Middle East and the financial markets. Acceleration, things happen very quickly. I can guarantee you I will be talking about Silicon Valley Bank because it's a big deal. And a week ago, I would guess that 99.99% of the people didn't even know there was a Silicon Valley Bank. We knew there were banks in Silicon Valley, but we didn't know about that particular bank. And it's the 16th or 18th largest bank in the country. So it's a significant bank, and it's gone today. So when we look at these things, we have this passage in Daniel chapter 12 that talks about the thing that the book's going to be sealed up until the time of the end. And when we get close to the end, people are going to have understanding. The wicked will never understand. So when you see this, so that's a prophecy about people will be ignorant in the end times. They're not going to be able to understand what's going on. Does that seem to be the case? I'm going to have to dig. I'll have to dig. Maybe somebody can dig for me. I don't know if there's a prophecy. Pam and I were talking on the way up about social media. That, social media is a great thing. It's fantastic for keeping in touch with people. And social media, it's one of the best things ever. And it's also one of the worst things ever at the same time. I mean, the fighting that I see going on with people, believe me, folks, if Facebook has all your data, God does too. And you need to remember that some of these things are going to be, that God's probably got a better database on you than Facebook does. And we'll talk a little bit too about Israel, Jerusalem, but we're only going to sort of skim the surface. So I mentioned this earlier, California beset by floods and rain. Here's a couple articles out of the Times of London the other day. ChatGPT invents a puzzle to keep humans busy. So I didn't read the article, so I don't know what the puzzle is, but there's something that ChatGPT has invented a puzzle to keep you busy. So if you don't have enough to do, go to ChatGPT, go find that puzzle. You can Google it, I guess, and find out. And then here's another article, a little bit about, this is a constant thing that's going on. So, for example, I see these tweets from people, and I don't know if the person was at Asbury or not, but he says, well, now everybody's repented of homophobia and transphobia. So you're not allowed to criticize it and be a Christian. And I hope that's not what comes out of Asbury. If it does, forget it, okay? Then it wasn't of the Lord. And I'm not saying you go out and make outrageous statements about things. But for example, there was a guy who said we needed to get rid of this transgender ideology. And so what happened on social media? Well, the left, the people that support this, went out and said, oh, he said you should go kill everybody who's transgender. And that's not what he said. But how long did it take for everybody to think that that's what, who was it that said it? Michael Knowles. How many people still today think that that's what he said? And he didn't say it. It's not true. What was the old saying that a lie can be all the way around the world before the truth puts its pants on to get out of bed, or gets out of bed and puts its pants on. I think that would be the proper order. But so here is this thing in the Times of London the other day. Pupils left tearful by unscientific lessons in sex education free-for-all. And what's happened is that the schools, at least as I sort of unpack these articles that I saw this week, The schools are uncomfortable talking about this in today's environment, so they're outsourcing it. Well, who's coming in to say, oh, hey, we'll help you out, we'll take it over, we'll do things for you, and it's groups that you don't want to have them done. Listen to a little bit of this story that happened. Jonathan, not his real name, was pulled out of a work meeting last year by his tearful 12-year-old daughter. She was incoherent, he said. Once she calmed down, she said that she had been taught things at school that she didn't think were true. The youngster said that she had been taught at her London girls' school about gender identity, including that children as young as 3 could be giving signals that they were transgender. She had taken screenshots of the relationships in sex education, it's called RRSC, lesson on her phone. Her father said, I was completely taken aback. The most revealing aspect of Jonathan's story is that the school's head teacher is believed not to have known what was being taught. He said she was adamant this wasn't being taught. She said, we do not teach gender identity in the school. When I showed her the screenshot, she was visibly surprised and apologized. Jonathan's story highlights an unease among parents and some teachers about relationships in sex education lessons. The Time has spoken to parents who say that their children were forced to mold Play-Doh body parts, private body parts, and has seen lesson plans that discuss a galaxy of genders and a card game called Planet Porn. We have been told that hundreds of sex education providers are offering their services as educators, creating a wild west in the environment. It now seems that while the guidance sensibly set out minimum requirements, it failed to put a ceiling on what should be covered and what was too vague. This is being acknowledged by the Department of Education, for which Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister in the UK, must ensure that schools are not teaching inappropriate or contested content. The Prime Minister was prompted by a dossier of evidence provided by Miriam Cates, a member of Parliament, which highlighted some of the providers on this in relationships and sex education and alleged inappropriate conduct. One of the things, this is the graphic that's used, that came out of one of the sessions. And what's interesting, that some of these providers who have brought this stuff to schools, what they are I don't know how else to say this, they're copyright Nazis. So in some cases, the schools have wanted to share this information, like, okay, yeah, we found out that this was being taught, and the lawyers for these people who are teaching things say, no, you can't share that. We have a copyright on that. But they're teaching it to the children. It's insanity what's happening. Here's a copy of this report. And this is the report that Cates person put out. However, school PSHE leads also produce their own in-house resources based on the information they receive from third-party providers and their own teacher training. The following lesson plan, prepared by a secondary academy, not only defines gender theory as fact, but asserts that gender identity is much more than an intrinsic part of you than your male or female parts, claiming that an inner sense of gender takes priority over the biological reality of the body. And we see this coming out in California, particularly in California, where all kinds of crazy fruits and nuts emanate from, including a lot of our vegetables and things that we eat, but also a lot of crazy ideas. And they've adopted this two-spirit idea out there. It comes out of what they say is Native American spirituality, and so that there's a heavy component of transgenderism within Native American spirituality. That's what they've said. For example, this is something that they were using in England, in the UK, the genderbread person. This has been around for quite a while now, and this is part of the lessons that they have. So this is a big problem. This is going to continue to be a problem. And to be honest with you, you need to find out what your kids are being taught. And if your kids aren't being taught the right thing, you need to raise a stink about it in a legal way. Because, of course, our government will say that if you are too boisterous about it, you're a terrorist. That's what the Attorney General, the Department of Justice has done, is to create a domestic terrorism. So people will actually go out and burn down courthouses. They're not terrorists. People will actually, rip little babies out of the wombs of expectant mothers are not terrorists, but somebody who prays outside an abortion clinic is. People who go and bomb and burn and commit arson at pregnancy decision centers are not terrorists. Have you heard any of them being charged, by the way? But people who pray, there's at least, 12 or 13 who've been charged under a federal statute and threatened with prison of up to 10 years in prison. By the way, do you know that let me get that off of there, I don't like that. There is a guy that made up some memes about Hillary Clinton voters. So in the 2020 election, you might remember Hillary Clinton was not running. So he sort of made a joke because, everybody's always portrays the other side as being total idiots and morons because they're voting for somebody that's against you. That's just the way politics are going right now. So what he did was he just thought, I'll make up, in one of the sort of it's sort of like the practical jokes that people say is, hey, be sure you show up on Wednesday to vote, which is like the day after Election Day. And so one of the things was that he created a meme and it said, Hillary Clinton voters, don't forget to go vote for Hillary Clinton in the coming election. Well, she wasn't running on the ballot. And so what they did was they said, the Department of Justice reasoned that, Hillary would get more minority voters, and therefore this was a way to suppress the minority vote in America. The person that did that is now being threatened with 10 years or more in federal prison under a Ku Klux Klan statute from back in the 1800s. Now, what this is doing is, again, this is the weaponization of the justice system. And as soon as you say that, MSNBC and everybody will be on there and they'll be saying, oh, there's no weaponization of the justice system. What are you talking about? You're trying to stoke violence. You're trying to get people pumped up. You're not very bright because this just isn't happening. But we see these cases that actually are happening. Did you see Jane Fonda on The View this week? I don't have any, and it was like, well, what do you want to do about the pro-life people? Education, and what did she say? Murder. And now I was joking. Now, do you think if Tucker Carlson or somebody else like that had done anything like that, that there would be a major problem, wouldn't there, with that? Okay, now I'm going to talk about South Dakota House Bill 1193. Now, this was a bill that was proposed. It actually passed the legislature in South Dakota, and in it was included this definition of money. It was a statute in part to amend terms of the Uniform Commercial Code. Almost every state has a Uniform Commercial Code, and it's pretty similar from state to state. And it governs things like what's a sale, what's a good, what's a sale of goods, what are remedies that you have, what are warranties that come. And states have modified them a little bit, but it's called the Uniform Commercial Code because it applies in almost every state. So, my understanding is that there are about 25 states where there is legislation like this pending. So this came to Governor Kristi Noem's desk, And it says money means a medium of exchange that is currently authorized or adopted by a domestic or foreign government. The term includes a monetary unit of account established by an intergovernmental organization or by agreement between two or more countries. The term does not include an electronic record that is a medium of exchange, recorded and transferable in a system that existed and operated for the medium of exchange before the medium of exchange was authorized or adopted by the government. Now, that probably is not real clear to I have to read it about 80 times to figure it out, okay? And I had a professor of commercial law in law school, and I can tell you that if he read a paragraph like that, he would be like high for a day. He would be so excited to read language like that and get to figure it out. It would just be so exciting to him. But what that language does is it essentially takes away the ability for cryptocurrency to be considered money. And this was proposed by a Republican legislature, people who supposedly believe in freedom and economic freedom. And it got to Kristi Noem's desk, and she decided to veto it. And in fact, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to play a short interview. Well, let me finish a couple things on the statute first. So here's another one, and it says down here, it says, electronic money means money in an electronic form, except what they just excluded, which would be cryptocurrency. And people were concerned about this. So I've not seen this in any major economic newspapers. It's mostly in the crypto community and their newsletters and blogs and websites where it's brought. So this is Cointelegraph, The Future of Money, and it says proposed South Dakota amendment to UCC would prohibit cryptocurrencies, but not CBDCs, central bank digital currencies. And we've talked a lot about that, and they're coming. They're going to be here eventually. They may be here in a week, given what's happened this week, which I'll talk about in just a moment. So it says here that 117-page amendment introduced into the State House, the House of Representatives by Republican Mike Stevens, defined money. But the bill did not allow that. So what Kristi Noem did was she found out about it and she said, no way, I'm vetoing the bill. Now, the legislature can still, this just happened the other day, the legislature could still override it. It says here, first, by expressly excluding cryptocurrencies as money, it would become more difficult to use cryptocurrency. By needlessly limiting this freedom, HB 1193 would put South Dakota's citizens at a business disadvantage. Second, by defining money in this proposed way, House Bill 1193 opens the door to the risk that the federal government could more easily adopt a CBDC, which may then become the only viable digital currency. And that's the concern. Now, I'm going to throw in here a video that I didn't get in before I had to come up here. Well, we lost an hour last night. That's why I was running late. And hang on a second here. So this was on Tucker Carlson the other night. I was going to clip it out, and I never got around to it. So I've got tons and tons of things. So here's Governor Kristi Noem on Tucker Carlson, and it's a few minutes long, explaining what happened. I thought it was a very good discussion, and then we'll follow up with some more things on central bank digital currencies, and then we'll get to the really sort of big economic news. So here's Kristi Noem on Tucker Carlson.
So the drama in the banking sector, the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank, has a lot of Americans concerned about how to protect their money. And of course, politicians are using that concern to their advantage as always. Several states are now trying to centralize currency with a so-called central bank digital currency, which is, by the way, not currency at all. It's software. But they're going to do it for your own good. Obviously, this is a tool of total social control. If they control your money, if they can zero out your bank account with a keystroke, then you have no autonomy. They control you. Well, in the state of South Dakota, legislators just passed a bill that would have changed the definition of money to exclude cryptocurrency, and that would put the state on a path to centralized digital currency. South Dakota's governor, Kristi Noem, the only governor we're aware of who's paying attention to this, vetoed that bill. She joins us tonight to explain why. Governor, thank you very much for doing this first and for coming on. Why did you do it? You're obviously under pressure not to veto it, but you did. Why did you?
Well, Tucker, it was the right thing to do. I became aware of this bill. It wasn't introduced until almost halfway through our legislative session. We started reading through this bill that was over 110 pages long. It was sold as an update to the guidelines of the Universal Commercial Code, backed by all of our financial institutions, our banks. As we started reading through it, we saw the section of the bill that changed the definition of currency. And essentially what it did was pave the way for a government-led CBDC, and it also banned any other form of cryptocurrency or Bitcoin or digital currency that existed. So for me, it very clearly was a threat to our freedom. In South Dakota, we are the session that completes its business earliest in the year. We are the first ones to really look at this bill and find out the truth of what's in it. And I did veto that bill. I'm asking my legislators to change their minds, to make the right decision and help me kill this bill once and for all. But I'm telling you, Tucker, we've got the same language coming to over 20 other states. I believe it's to pave a way for the federal government to control our currency and thus control people. It should be alarming to everyone, and it's being sold as a UCC guidelines update. There's no rush to do this. We need to be smart and make sure that we're doing what we can to protect people. I find it ironic that we also are having this discussion at the same time we have banks and credit card companies talking about coding gun and ammunition in a separate code so they can track it. So not only can they tie these two issues together, if the government doesn't approve of what you're purchasing, if they have the only form of digital currency out there and that is endorsed and utilized in the country, they can control how you spend that money and thus take away all your freedom.
It's so nicely put, and I don't think you're overstating at all the significance of this. Really quickly, do you think, and you want to give everyone the benefit of the doubt on their motives, but do you think that legislators in your state understand what this bill was actually designed to do?
I don't know if they read it, Tucker. That's what is alarming to me, is it was over 110 pages long, and they were told by lobbyists that they had listened to for the last 20 years that it's fine. It's just a regulation update. This is what we do, is adopt federal regulations. But if you start reading it, you see in there is a redefinition of currency, that it says government CBDCs are okay if they're run by the government, but any other form is then banned. It is clearly a change for how people's assets are utilized. It clearly limits the freedom of people to use other forms of currency that they may choose to if it is a digital currency. And it is clearly putting power into the hands of government. If anything we should have learned the last several years is the government can't be trusted. Bill Tucker, what I was surprised by was that, the bills that have made it to my desk this year, people think about South Dakota being conservative and being a very Republican state. The first bill I had to veto was a tax increase. Now this has made it to my desk. We've got other challenges as well.
I really hope that what you've done inspires other governors. Appreciate your coming on tonight. Governor Kristi Noem of South Dakota, thank you.
I'm going to play a clip of a guy from the Bank for International Settlements located in Basel, Switzerland. This is sort of the central bank of central banks. This is sort of the international hub. There's a lot, by the way, a lot of stuff that goes on in Switzerland. Like the UN meets in New York, and that's kind of the I don't know what else to say. I'm going to say what comes to my head first. That's where the International Clown Show takes place. Where everybody comes and people pound on tables and they give speeches and they talk about things that they don't really mean. And there's a whole sense of, bureaucracy. And then there's a whole bunch of diplomats there that get to park all over the streets of New York and clog up traffic. And you can't give them a parking ticket because they have diplomatic immunity and that sort of thing. And I spent a lot of time in Manhattan, so I know a little bit about what goes on there with these guys. But this guy is Augustin Carstens, and he is the general manager of the Bank of International Settlements. And this was what he said at a Zoom meeting about a year ago about central bank digital currencies and why the Bank for International Settlements wants these to be put in place. Listen to what he says.
All our analysis on CBDC, in particular for the use of general use, we tend to establish the equivalence with cash. And there is a huge difference there. For example, in cash, we don't know, for example, who's using a $100 bill today. We don't know who is using a 1,000 peso bill today. A key difference with the CBDC is that central bank will have absolute control on the rules and regulations that will determine the use of that expression of central bank liability. And also, we will have the technology to enforce that. Those two issues are extremely important, and that makes a huge difference with respect to what cash is.
So I guess he's okay with somebody controlling your money and how you spend it. And he likes that. Now, I could make a comment, and it would be sort of self-deprecating, that he obviously has a larger carbon footprint than most people. I know that, and I'm all for that if that's how he wants to be, or that's how he's made. That's fine, but they don't, because the rules will never apply to them. That's the way it's going to be. He's part of the elites. And so the UN, by the way, where the really nitty-gritty work of the UN is done with all this stuff like this and things that like sustainable development goals and that type of thing, is in Geneva, where there's a lot of UN organizations. So that's where, so I don't know if taking out New York City would get rid of the damage that the UN plans on doing over the next period of time. So Carson's also spoke this week at a keynote speech at the Monetary Authority of Singapore on February 22nd. And I got this from a website called The Sociable. It's run by Tim Hinchcliffe, I think is how you say his name. And it's an excellent website. Tim Hinchcliffe. Hinchcliffe. You can follow him on Twitter. But listen to some of these, and I'm going to just give you some quotes of what Carson said at this conference in Singapore. There is great promise in developing the idea of a unified ledger with a common programming environment. So he sort of gave the big idea in October of 2020. Now he's digging down into some of the nitty-gritty details. A unified ledger is a digital infrastructure with the potential to combine the monetary system with other registries of real and financial claims. It would need to be a public-private partnership, i.e. fascist, with a clear division of roles and where the central bank is tasked with underpinning the trust in money. Now, there was another guy from the managing director of the People's Bank of China, Bo Li, explained how CBDCs could be programmed to determine what people could own. CBDC, and remember, Xi was just sworn into his third 5-year term as head of the People's Republic of China this year. And by the way, the vote in the People's Legislature, whatever, was like 2,954 in favor of Xi and 0 against. I wonder if that guy getting drug out at the last People's Congress meeting, whatever they call that thing, in the Great Hall of the People, when that guy was going to get up and give some critical comments and he was drug out, and I don't think he's been seen since. And he had been, by the way, he'd been the president for 10 years. So these are the people that are making decisions on how to do things. CBDC, this is what this Chinese guy says, can allow government agencies and private sector players to program to create smart contracts to allow targeted policy functions. For example, welfare payment. For example, consumption coupons. For example, food stamps. By programming CBDC, this money can be precisely targeted for what people can own and what kind of use this money can be allowed. CBDC can allow government agencies and private sector players to allow targeted policy functions. By programming this, the money can be precisely targeted for what people can own and what this money can be utilized for. At a cybersecurity exercise, Cyber Polygon, I talked about this back in 2021. The one in 2022 got canceled, but now you can kind of sign up and do it online if you want to pay a little bit of a fee. They were talking about a digital ruble. The digital ruble will permit better traceability of payments and money flow, and also explore the possibility of setting conditions on permitted terms of use of a given unit of currency. Just imagine that you're able to give your kids some money in digital rubles and then restrict their use for purchase of junk food, for example. I mean, everybody was in favor of that, right? That would be a useful functionality for a customer. And of course, you can come up with hundreds of other similar use cases. And this has happened in this article. Tim, or the author of this article, goes on and talks about all of these things that it can be used for. And India's considering it, and Brazil's rolling it out. And I think that some of the change in power structures in Brazil had to do with that. So that's that. Now let's talk about the one, I'm sure this is the one I think everybody wants me to talk about. And this is the lead up to this. BASF, remember I talked about them a few months ago, that they were going to shift a lot of their things to China because they couldn't get natural gas. Why could they not get natural gas? Because the flow of natural gas, which is used in the chemicals that they make, the fertilizers they make, they didn't know that they would have access to it, so they're going to shift everything to China. It's going to cost thousands and thousands of jobs. In the city where they're located, it's maybe the largest chemical plant on planet Earth. It's a huge facility. And it's one of these things, when they start to shut it down, it's over. Okay? They would have to essentially rebuild it completely to start it back up. Well, now they've come out and said the energy costs are still so high in Europe. And part of that is because they don't have cheap gas through the Nord Stream. Of course, Nord Stream 2 never started. Germany didn't let it start. They could have, but they never did. And so now they're paying for LNG, liquefied natural gas from the United States, which is much, much more expensive, like 3-4 times as expensive. And people who do that in the United States are making a killing, but they're closing this down because of high energy costs. And this was purported over the last couple of weeks. Chemical giant BASF announced plans on Friday to cut 2,600 positions, mainly in Germany, as it reported a slide in earnings that it attributed to a shifting global demand and a loss of the cheap Russian natural gas that has served as a backbone of the company for decades. The grim announcement from one of Germany's industrial leaders came 1 year to the day after Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which set off an energy crisis in Europe as Moscow began dialing back its shipments of natural gas as punishment for the bloc's support of sanctions. This article says high energy prices are now putting an additional burden on profitability and competitiveness. Oh, there's one other thing I want to talk about because it relates to banking and economy and this green energy. This is editorial in The Guardian about the Dutch farmer protest. Until relatively recently, Dutch farming prowess was hailed as one of the wonders of the global economy. In 2017, I'll show you a couple pictures from the pages of that issue, the National Geographic article headline, "This tiny country feeds the world." In fact, this is what It was in the September 2017. A Tiny Country Feeds the World. And if you go to the National Geographic website, you'll see this kind of really cool video about the things that they're doing in the Netherlands and Holland. And this is a small country, but they've developed the technology. You can see the greenhouses and things that you have. You see some of these up around, like south of Van Wert there, around 127 and 33. You have this big farming warehouses, greenhouses. They're similar to what these are. And so but what's happened though is they've wanted to shut everything down. This Tiny Country Feeds the World encapsulated a sense of national pride at the Netherlands status as the second biggest exporter of agricultural products by value behind the United States. These days, Dutch farmers are in the headlines for less upbeat reasons, as the climate emergency and a related biodiversity crisis belatedly take center stage in policymaking. The Prime Minister, Mark Rutte, has committed to cutting in half, the country's overall nitrogen emissions cut in half by 2030. A large proportion of these are generated by the manure and urine produced by more than 100 million cattle, pigs, and chickens. To reach the target, the government has announced plans to reduce livestock numbers by a third. Reluctant farmers have been warned they could be subject to compulsory buyouts. And look, the farmers have made a lot of money. There's this guy, the Dutch chemist. This is on Politico, which is not a right-wing organization. Look at what the title of this article is. Protecting Nature, Destroying Lives. The Chemists versus the Dutch Farmers. And it talks about this guy. He's both a green campaigner and a wellspring of mayhem, a progenitor of a series of legal battles that has upended the country by forcing the government to enforce its environmental commitments. Bollenbroek has made the Netherlands cap the number of flights arriving at major airports, reconsider housing projects, and cut the speed limits on its highways. So, in keeping with our friends at the World Economic Forum, you'll own nothing, and you won't be able to get anywhere anyway, and you'll live in a 15-minute city, which is, by the way, a big conspiracy theory now. It's just a planning thing, you crazy people. It's not restricting you. You can go downtown. It'll cost you $600, if you're over your allotted 3 trips for the month. But you're free to go. And by the way, we'll just take it out of your Central Bank digital currency wallet. You don't even have to write us a check. Well, just don't worry about it. And now you really own nothing. And you'll be a little bit upset with the government. But he says cut speed limits on the highways. But it's his showdown with Dutch farmers over nitrogen pollution that has drawn the most attention and spilled the greatest quantities of bad blood. With thousands of farmers facing uncertain futures because of his efforts, this is what guys like Yuval Noah Harari say is coming, and sometimes they seem like a little bit happy when they talk about it. Has turned bitter, violent, and arguably deadly, but Bollenbroek has no intention of slowing down. Indeed, he believes what is happening in the Netherlands is just the beginning. It's clear that farmers all over Europe will have to go through a transition. Too bad for you. Because of him, the Netherlands is the first country being forced to reconcile its environmental ambitions with its economic reality in such a dramatic fashion. The hammer is falling there first. This is Politico. And it's falling hard as countries try to align their societies with the limits of nature, including cutting back carbon dioxide emissions to stop climate change. The hammer is going to fall elsewhere. Now, look at what really drives this guy. He talked to him for 3 hours over a few days. There are human consequences, but the problem is that we have politicians in the Netherlands who are telling fairy tales to the farmers. In other words, we're going to do this to you. The transition for the farmers may be painful, but it's also painful for someone who cares about nature. He added, harking back to old fights with his father. Wallenbrecht also blamed God, or at least Genesis. I think that Christianity is causing this disastrous attitude toward the climate. Because if you read the Bible, then mankind is on a much higher level than nature. So you see, it's not necessarily ideological that's driving this. As we have said here many times, it is theological. This is a religion. This is Mother Earth worship. And it lies at the heart of technocracy and transhumanism and artificial intelligence and what the elites want to do. And which they may end up doing because this is part of the way it unfolds. But you need to be aware of it. We should start to consider that we are part of nature. From a purely biological point of view, you could consider mankind as a kind of fungus covering the earth. Rather than being the builder of a new and better world, arguably in this case the job of the Dutch government, Wallenbrecht described himself as something closer to Mother Nature's immune response. He's the word that I'm not allowed to say because it would trigger things. I'm the CRISPR guy to alter the planet's DNA. When you've got some bacteria or viruses in your stomach and the system is getting upset, well, then the system is going to react. And I'm the white blood cell. So it's an interesting thing. I showed you this about some of the things that they do. Now, let's get to the bank, Silicon Valley Bank. Never heard of it until a week ago. It was the 18th largest bank in the country. It is gone. Actually, well, give me 1 second here. I can grab my. It had billions of dollars of assets. Here's a graphic of the bank. And so you see how it is. And the bank's gone. It's done. Okay, they've come in, they've shut it down. They had massive amounts of money being transferred out. And you know that each account is only insured up to $250,000 by the FDIC. It was shut down by state regulators, by California state regulators. I think in part so that the big guy in, the guy we refer to as the big guy in DC, you know who he is. They call him the big guy in all the emails with his son. So the big guy wouldn't get blamed. So that Janet Yellen wouldn't get blamed. And by the way, this bank was big on diversity, equity, inclusion. They spent a lot of time and money on this. And there's some studies out this week that says, the companies that do DEI, they're really not very profitable compared to the companies that don't focus on that. Companies that focus on like making money do better than the ones that focus on this other stuff. So, and there's a lot of concern now. I'm not, part of this is very fluid. So if I misstate it, please don't take this as the gospel truth in this case. So I'm putting a disclaimer that I'm not 100% certain how this happened, but my understanding is they were taking deposits from the bank. So in a fractional banking system, what happens is you put your money in the bank, right? And you think that if you put $100 in the bank, then the bank always has $100. Well, it does have $100 to give you unless everybody else wants $100. And when everybody starts asking for all of their money, there's not enough bank because the bank will keep about, let's say, 7% of its total assets in liquid cash, liquid assets that they can give money back to depositors. The rest they lend out. They charge interest on the money, But what happened here was they were investing in hedge funds and that type of thing. And some of the hedge funds went south. They caused massive losses at the bank. They had to start selling off assets to get that. They tried to raise capital by selling stock. Everything fell apart. And so within a couple, 3 days, everything fell apart. Now, there were some people that were involved with these hedge funds, investment funds. My understanding is I saw the name Peter Thiel, who's a big, investment guy, venture capital guy, got a lot of the money out of the bank. But now what happened was this was a tech bank. So when the tech companies would raise money through stock offerings, issuing stock, that money would be deposited into Silicon Valley Bank. And Silicon Valley Bank has branches all over the world, including in Israel, and I'll get to that in just a moment. And now that the bank is gone, what are these tech startups, companies like Roku and others, appear not to have been able to get their money out. And in some cases, it's billions of dollars. Many of them, they think, are not going to be able to make payroll. Now, what's interesting, in Israel, they have this controversy going on about judicial reform. And part of the judicial reform, the response to the judicial reform proposed by the Netanyahu coalition, is people have been running around saying, take your money out of Israel, get your money out of Israel, get your money out of Israel. And so what a lot of tech companies, by the way, that are participating in that, and the goal is to collapse the government. And I don't, honestly, I'm watching it from afar, so I'm not there. They had massive protests yesterday, probably the largest that they've had so far. They said this is from Haaretz, which is a left-wing newspaper. But they have some good people that write for it, and they're the biggest in Israel history, the 10th week that these have been going on. But you see down here is this one article, if bank crisis isn't sorted out in days, some startups won't make payroll. So what is going to happen is a lot of these tech companies, Israel, the startup nation, a lot of these tech companies that have their money in Silicon Valley Bank, they may be toast. And so it could have a big impact on the Israeli economy, which is what they want to do. And so maybe they're getting what they wish for. What's the old saying? What movie was that in? Out of Africa with Meryl Streep. They quoted a philosopher, when the gods want to destroy you, they grant you your dreams. Maybe this is what's happening here. Not that I think, by the way, that movie is a great philosophical movie, but it was just an interesting quote that I saw. What happened in the United States, that the largest banks in the United States, I think JP Morgan went up because Jamie Dimon saw what was coming. And he said, hey, transfer your money, you better transfer it now, over to JP Morgan. So JP Morgan's stock went up, but the other large banks in the country, like Bank of America, Wells Fargo, and some others, they went down in market value one day, $52 billion in market capitalization. That's huge. $52 billion, poof. And you can see what happened to Silicon Valley Bank share price. It plummeted. So now the question is, what's going to happen? By the way, a bank that size, I've had clients in the financial services, and I've represented some banks. Not like I'm the main guy representing the bank. I do some stuff that banks need. But like when you have a company that's involved in selling securities, they'll get audited. And you can tell whether the company's doing anything wrong or not. When the auditors come in, it's sort of like mom coming in to check your room when you're a teenager, okay? You're not doing anything wrong. It's just, this is my space, get out of it. And the regulators come in, but a bank this size will likely have like JP Morgan Chase, which is the biggest bank in the country. It's trillions of dollars in assets. And one of the biggest office buildings in the world down here, just 10 miles, 12 miles away. They'll have a team of regulators and analysts in there all the time. They never leave. They just sort of set up permanent shop there. Silicon Valley Bank would be the same thing. So now the question is, why was this missed? Why were people missing what they were doing with the money? There's also pretty good indication that the day it was going down, massive bonuses were paid to management at the bank. This is a big scandal, and this is the second largest bank failure in U.S. history. The biggest being Washington Mutual Bank back in September of 2008, after the Lehman Brothers collapse and that sort of thing. That was $307 billion. This is $209 billion. So it's a big deal. And you see down here, there's a stat that says more than 500 banks failed from 2008 through 2014. So now the question will be this, and I just texted with one of my friends who consults with banks and advises them and things like this. There's actually a new software system that's being rolled out for almost all banks that will tell you, it analyzes everything you've been doing for like the last 10 or 15 years, and it tells you, okay, you got a problem, you need to put more capital, liquid capital cash into the bank. But that's not rolled out yet, but it's pretty sure that Silicon Valley Bank was part of that. I think it's called CECL, C-E-C-L or something like that. So it's a software system that's going to analyze this. But this bank is done. So now the question is, what does the Fed do? They're coming in. This is going to take a little while to sort out. What they did in the case of Lehman Brothers was they were able to roll a lot of the decent assets out of Lehman Brothers into a Lehman Brothers bank. And I know that because I represented Lehman Brothers Bank back in those days and working out some of these assets and making sure the bank got money. I don't know if they're going to do that here or not. That's up in the air. And you're going to hear a lot of rumors that there's runs on every bank, you've got to get your cash out and that sort of thing. I think you need to pay attention. I think if there is a bank holiday, the federal regulatory authorities have to give notice of that. I'm not sending in notice, but I'm hearing rumors that they're going to declare a bank holiday. I have no idea what's going to happen, so I'm not advising you to do anything. I would always advise you, if you asked me 4 weeks ago, make sure you have some cash on hand. That's always good to have some cash. And could this be the trigger event that they use to roll out central bank digital currencies much sooner than we thought? That's possible too. It's going to be very difficult to avoid that when it happens, because the whole system will do that. I see, how many of you notice when you drive around, you go to a business and there's a sign there by a thing, they used to call it the cash register. Remember, they used to have cash in the cash registers. So I go, there's golf courses I go to, and there's other businesses, and what do they all say? Cash no longer accepted at this location. So they're already going digital, and the question is it going to be a central bank digital currency that's going to have all the baggage with it that the Bank of International Settlement guys, the World Economic Forum guys, the regulatory guys, it's their dream to have complete control of your money and be able to tell you what to do with it. It's sort of the statements made about the nanny state. You cannot state enough how onerous they want to control things. So, be wise. Pay attention. You need to actually be looking at the news. And so I'm not aware of anything that says there's a bank holiday. They will give notice of that, but you need to be agile and prepared. I mentioned this last Sunday. You need to be prepared. You need to have some food stored up, because this thing could unwind in a very, very negative way. We all know what happened back in 2008. The Fed came in, and what did they do? Everything was too big to fail, and they pumped all kinds of money into the system. They did that a couple of years ago when Charlie Vector started, remember? Trillions of dollars just created out of thin air. But the question is, common sense tells you they cannot do that forever. So maybe the way out in this particular case, and there's concerns of contagion spreading. It's valid concerns. This is a big, big bank. Could they want to do a reset? Have we heard anybody propose that they wanted to do a reset? And not a small reset, but a great reset. And they're not specific about how they want to do that. So I'm just saying you got to be prepared for all of that. And I do think it does play into end times things. So let's talk about Middle East and some things that happened there, because there's a couple significant things. And we'll talk a little bit more about judicial reform. Did somebody play with the clock back there? No, I'm just kidding. It's springing forward on me. This is a big deal, and I'll try to summarize it, because I could go on for this. You may find this hard to believe. I could go on for this for quite a while. Saudi Arabia and Iran have agreed to restore diplomatic ties. Now, part of this is because Saudi Arabia has been on the outs with the United States government. They don't feel that they're getting support. They're concerned about what's going to happen, and Saudi Arabia is concerned. Back in 2018 or 19, Iran attacked the Saudi major oil facility, the refinery, and caused a lot of damage, the largest refinery in the world. There was not much of a response by anybody to that. There were some sanctions put on Iran. Iran shot down a specialized drone that the United States had patrolling in the Persian Gulf. By the way, that drone cost $230 million, one plane. It was very sophisticated. It could stay in the air for like 34 hours. It has sophisticated electronics, and I'm not so sure that Iran did not pick up the pieces and has been working to reverse engineer and make better weapons. Just like what happened, we know happened with the things left behind in Afghanistan. About $80 billion worth of equipment. There's also stories in the press this week that American equipment that's been provided to Ukraine that gets captured by Russia is being sent to Iran. And they're reverse engineering those missiles and that sort of thing to see if they can figure out what our technology is. So Saudi Arabia, understandably, was nervous. China, remember Xi went to Riyadh maybe a month or so ago to have a meeting with the Crown Prince, and I think the king. The king is, I think he's 86 now, and he's not seen in public much. He's pretty frail, not in the best of health. And now China has brokered this agreement between Saudi Arabia and Iran. Now the question is, what happens? This is the front page of the Tehran Times. Who won? Who lost? This is from Israel Ayom, talking about the fact that there's a normalization mediated by China. Saudi Arabia is still saying there's a chance we might understand. Netanyahu, one of the two main things that he wanted to do when he came in with his new government, said this back in December, around December 25th when the government was formed, stop Iran from getting nukes and normalize things with Saudi Arabia. Now, he's not accomplished either one of those. And you'll see a lot of people in the Israeli political stage saying, well, see, he can't accomplish anything. And look at this. They're blaming Netanyahu for this. This is all Netanyahu's fault. If he was a better leader, this wouldn't have happened. We should bring back, Lapid or somebody like that. So the embassies are going to open embassies in each other's capital within 2 months. And the question, though, is what are you going to do about this? And so this is, you can go to Israel Home, you can dig out the go to Google Translate, but listen to this one editorial. And I'm not even going to try to say the guy's name, mainly because I didn't write it down, so I couldn't say it anyway. But it says this is why, so I want you to put this in the prophetic context. We know that there will be a city in the end times that will be what? A cup of trembling. It's not Riyadh, it's not Neom, it's not a future Babylon, it's called what? Jerusalem. So listen to just what he says in this particular article. That is why attention should be directed to Jerusalem. And first and foremost to the Temple Mount, perhaps the most dangerous explosive in the scene. The many warnings lead to the necessary risk of the security system in Israel. The activity leads to many Palestinian casualties, which leads to revenge, further action in a vicious circle. Let us not be broken. These are the days when, in parallel with the operational effort, restraint are needed on the part of the political echelon. This is true for stalemates that do nothing to cool the atmosphere and for non-urgent actions that are not the thwarting of a ticking time bomb, which is better to examine carefully in the near future. In other words, this guy's saying, calm down, everybody. We have a big problem. And he's right. Regarding the campaign between the wars, you'll see that called CBW in a lot of publications. They had this thing in 2006 with Lebanon, and now the question is, what's happening? Nasrallah came out, the head of Hezbollah came out this week and said, listen, we are looking at the end of the Zionist entity. It's imminent. So what happens? Do people have the technology? This article, this is the end of Saudi-Iranian tensions. This article from the Arab News refers back to an Atlantic article written about Mohammed bin Salman about a year ago, March 3rd or 7th, it came out a year ago, titled Absolute Power, written by Graham Wood. He's a man of the left, but he's a good writer, and this is a very comprehensive article. You can find it online if you haven't used up all your free Atlantic, and most of you are smart people, so you're not reading the Atlantic every day. Because it can be kind of irritating, but they have some pretty good journalists there. It's just oriented. But look at what when he's talking about Mohammed bin Salman a year ago, look, even MBS critics can see that he has roused the country from an economic and social slumber. In 2016, he unveiled a plan known as Vision 2030. And I have a friend on Facebook who put up all of these things that revolve around 2030. Why is everybody using 2030? Well, that's their goal. And I don't know, maybe it plays into Bible prophecy. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. I think when everybody in the world is talking about 2030, maybe it's a good idea to pay attention that they maybe have some plans. There's a video, I've showed you that, and I'm going to mention Ukraine and Russia. And some of the most vicious emails I get and comments are about, if I say anything that says Ukraine has a beef about this, oh, you're pro-Ukrainian and you hate Putin, and Putin, he gave a great sermon at his speech. Oh, the guy who lives with a mistress gave a great sermon? People are losing their minds. So listen, I want this to be perfectly clear. I'm neither pro-Ukrainian nor pro-Russian. I will admit, I have very big concerns, and you could call me anti-Russian. Because what I'm seeing and talking to friends in Ukraine is the destruction of a country. And everybody says, well, you know, they were attacking Russian ethics in the eastern part. And okay, we'll grant you that, okay? But that country has been obliterated in large part. And so, but we see an alliance forming between Russia and Iran to go against Ukraine. And I don't know what the end game is in Ukraine. A lot of it doesn't make any sense to me when I sit there and say, this doesn't make any sense. Why Russia went in, why we have such a big interest there. Now I know there's all the thoughts about corruption and that sort of thing. And maybe that's the case, that there's a lot of corruption in Ukraine that benefits people here in the United States and elsewhere, elites in the world. And there's a lot of corruption in Russia too. That's, you know, so far as I know, the only person on the planet who has a house that's worth $1 billion is Vladimir Putin. A public servant. So do the math on that, okay, and get back to me. So I'm just saying is, it's okay to say both sides are bad. And I'm trying to be objective when I talk about this. And I can point out bad things from Ukraine. And there's plenty of people out there pointing out nothing but good about Ukraine and everything bad about Russia. And it's a complete mess. And everybody gets on social media and fights. And I've received some vicious comments this past week. This really needs to stop. This thing will sort out. I think last I read, God was in control ultimately, and this thing may play into the whole end time scenario. I'm more increasing that it is. But part of what I'm pretty sure that certain elites in the world want to do is they don't really care if Ukraine is obliterated. They're going to rebuild this great utopian model country and economy to hold up as an example. That's the goal. There's a video out there called Ukraine 2030. Go look at it. That's what they plan to do. There's a book out there called Ukraine 2030. You can download it and read it, and it's all about the sustainable development goals and that type of thing. So, so back to Mohammed bin Salman and this. So this is a big deal. And here's one headline got out of sequence. This talks about Silicon Valley Bank and what's going to happen in that. So now we have Iran and Saudi Arabia at least establishing diplomatic relations for the first time in 7 years. And what's the implication of that? Because there is potential here we go. Here's a map. So there's a lot of talk. So does this mean that Israel is more inclined to do something before they establish diplomatic embassies in each other country? I'm pretty sure some of the details of the agreement have been released in press releases, so they don't tell you all the details. My concern is that Saudi Arabia has granted Israel the ability to fly over Saudi airspace for commercial flights. That doesn't include military. And you might notice that to get from Israel, they're on the eastern side of the Mediterranean, to Tehran, you got to go across Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Iraq to get to Tehran or to get to the nuclear facilities. That's probably off the table. Now, by the way, so that's roughly about, let's say from Jerusalem to Tehran is about 900 miles, let's say. Maybe it's 850, I don't know the exact number. It was interesting this week that Israeli fighter jets and tankers and that type of thing flew from Israel to the west to Spain. Now, why is that important? And I mentioned this in my update I did on Friday. That, by the way, Friday is midweek for me. Okay? Sunday is the first day of the week. Saturday is the last day of the week. Everything in between is midweek. It's very easy to remember. So when I say I'm going to do a midweek, that means sometime, hopefully before Saturday. I'll figure out how to get Saturday in there eventually. But so they flew from, and somebody pointed out in a comment, brilliant comment. I appreciate the person making. By the way, if you look at the south end of the Sinai Peninsula, you see that green line? That's the line. That's Neom. That's the line city that they're building right now. That kind of gives you an idea how big it is, 100 miles long. But the distance from Israel to Spain is a little over about 2.5 times the distance from Israel to Tehran. So why would Israel fly all the way to Spain in the opposite direction? Well, they're doing test runs because they want to say, okay, we have, let's say, 1,000 miles, and it's 2,200 miles to Spain, one direction. So that would be enough for us to get to Iran and back if we practice. But now the question is, can they do it? Now, there was some question, okay, well, we'll just use Azerbaijan as a place to attack from. But then this article was in the Friday Jerusalem Post. Azerbaijan envoy to Israel, you can't use our airfields to attack Iran. So now this gets very complicated. And what happens, let's say, so the only other alternative right now, they're not going to use Bahrain on the Gulf because it's too close to Iran. They would never do that. They're not going to use Qatar, where we do have a base. We also have a base in Bahrain, the United States. Not going to use Qatar, or whatever, however you say it, Qatar, because they're Muslim Brotherhood. They only accommodate us for various reasons. Plus, they share the largest natural gas field on planet Earth with Iran, and they're not going to upset that money machine that they have there in the Persian Gulf. So maybe we'll use American aircraft carriers, and that's possible. But now you have, okay, so we're going to take out nuclear facilities in Iran. There's some discussion that maybe uranium is being provided by Russia to Iran to help them out because they're giving us drones and missiles and that type of thing to use in Ukraine, although they all deny it. But people pick up Ukrainian drones that get shot down. And Ukraine's doing a great job shooting these things down. People pick up the debris and it says, made in Iran, effectively. It's pretty easy to piece it together. But then Russia says, well, we're not buying it from them. So pretty sure that you really can't believe anything that anybody says. But Ukraine is shooting down a lot of missiles. There was a huge missile attack the other day. But in that missile attack, Russia used some hypersonic missile. And these things, I believe, cost in the millions of dollars each. They fly at 8 to 13 times the speed of sound. And there's really not a missile defense system on the planet that can shoot them down. But the question is, Russia has a lot more firepower than Ukraine. They have a lot more men. They have a lot more soldiers. They're bringing more in. Why are they shooting hypersonic missiles? As somebody said, they pretty much destroyed everything that is worth being destroyed in Ukraine at this point. And the only thing I can think of is maybe they're practicing. Iran is getting a lot of intel on how their drones do and their missiles and everything from what is being used in Ukraine. Now you throw in the complication of China making statements about we want to attack Taiwan. CSIS, it's a think tank. You can go and download they did a war game about a month ago of okay, what happens if China invades Taiwan? What's going to be the outcome? And the outcome was that China didn't really do very well. The United States came in to help. We lost hundreds of planes. And we went through our missile stores that we had left in a week. And right now, Caroline Glick did a good interview with David Goldman about a week ago. And David's, he's a smart guy, used to write as Spengler for the Asia Times. And he seems to be sort of pro-China in some respects. And he gives China a lot of credit. But he made the point in the interview with Caroline that, listen, United States, we have people analyzing what our defense capabilities are, like what missiles we have, our ammunition and that type of thing. And to get back to what we were before the Ukraine war started will take 13 years based on the manufacturing capabilities that we have now. And we're at war with China, so it's not like, hey, can you use some of your cheap labor to make some missiles for us so we can shoot them at you? It's not going to work that way. I'm just making a wild guess. And so we have a problem. And so the war game that CSIS did was, listen, United States, you're going to go through the missiles that you have in a week. By the way, Russia, their military doctrine is to just pummel people, just obliterate them, and send wave after wave of humans. So the best I can tell is Ukraine may be losing 800 soldiers a day. That's the equivalent of about a battalion. Russia's probably losing more every day, but the proportion is much less than so the percentage of dead Ukrainians to the total in the military is much higher than the percentage of Russians being lost to the total military. But there's a lot of people dying. It's certainly probably up above 300,000. So Russia just bombs people with artillery and missiles and drones and that type of thing. And they may run out eventually. I don't know how much they have. That's an open question. And they also have a large nuclear arsenal. But somebody said, look, if Hezbollah fired from their couple 100,000 missiles and rockets that they have, if they fired those at Israel at the rate Russia is throwing things into Ukraine, how long do you think the Hezbollah missiles and rockets would last? 200,000 of them. 3 days. So we're really in what I think is the Third World War. We got a major bank that failed. We got this peace agreement. And then there was this big report in the Wall Street Journal. It would save me a lot of time if I didn't bother trying to put these in order, because I end up getting out of order anyway. A PowerPoint is great, but it's very linear. So it'd be great if I could just sort of AI it and say, okay, when I think it, then that slide would pop up. But this is from the Wall Street Journal on Friday, saying Saudis seek edge in Israel talks. And what's interesting is that Saudi Arabia is not so much asking for things from Israel, they're asking for things from the United States. They want us to provide them with nuclear fuel because they want to build nuclear reactors. And they're kind of, Saudis are pretty smart. They have all the oil, but they're causing people to not use as much oil, which drives the price of oil up because they're pushing this ESG stuff through their Financial Innovation Institute, which is similar to the World Economic Forum. And then they want to use nuclear power because they recognize nuclear power is probably the greenest power on the planet. And there's hopes that people are going to develop hydrogen and other things, but I don't know if those are going to happen practically. But listen, Saudis want the United States to step in to help Israel. And at the same time, so I'm going to do a midweek this week. And I would highly recommend, if you want to listen to it, you don't have to listen to the whole thing. But Caroline Glick, and I do respect Caroline Glick a lot, there's a problem in Israel. As part of the judicial reform protest, Israeli reservists are refusing to show up for duty. Now, that's a big deal when you have like Iran and Saudi Arabia reaching an agreement. Iran has reached effectively breakout capacity on developing enough uranium for a bomb. They say 12 days, 10 days, who knows? They're there. That's what you should do. And so Caroline had a good discussion with a man I know, General Amir Avivi, retired Brigadier General Amir Avivi of the Israeli Defense and Security Forum. And so you can go to JNS, Jewish News Syndicate, YouTube channel, and you can get Caroline Glick's talk the other day with Amir. And Amir made some good points because, look, we can't be political in the Israeli Defense Force. And I think he's still in the reserve. And he also did a great panel when I was in Jerusalem. I had a chance to talk to him for a little bit about Iran. What are we going to do with Iran? We're going to have to do something soon. We cannot let this continue to go on. But now the question is, it seems like roadblock after roadblock after roadblock is being set up. And if there is an attack on Iran, I can pretty much guarantee you we're in the midst of a world war. Clear world war. Shooting and embargoes and all this type of thing that go with wars. In which case, Silicon Valley Bank going under will be maybe the least of our problems. But maybe it'll be the biggest of our problems. Who knows? We'll see how it goes. And there's a decided effort on the part of the United States to kind of interfere in Israeli politics. The Biden administration, Biden himself came out in an email exchange with Tom Friedman of the New York Times, and he said, you can't do this judicial reform. This is just terrible what you're doing. Now, there are some people who are proposing drafting a constitution for Israel and maybe making some compromise, but things are very polarized there. So I don't know where they're going to go. But I just think it's kind of, I see all these arguments that the democratically elected Knesset is destroying democracy by enacting laws. I don't know. It's laws you don't like, and it's laws that maybe aren't wise, and it's laws that maybe will be very damaging to Israeli society. But that's part of the process. So if you don't want that to happen, put some checks and balances in the system, which they don't really have. One other thing that's going on, and I didn't say that was only one other thing I was going to talk about. One other thing that's going on is Turkey is getting ready to go to elections in May, mid-May, and there's a lot of questions. Is the earthquake going to cause problems for Erdogan? And it seems that at least right now, the parties opposing Erdogan are pretty unified in their opposition. Erdogan seems to always get through these things. He's been in power for 20 years now. There's also a lot of talk about this thing called the Treaty of Lausanne. And this was signed in July of 1923, 100 years. Now, there's a lot of theories floating around that this treaty is only going to last for 100 years. There's nothing. I read the treaty this week. In fact, here's a copy that you can get off the internet, off Wikipedia and other sites. And there's nothing in there that says this is only going to last for 100 years. But this is how modern-day Turkey was constituted after the fall of the Ottoman Empire. There was a treaty called the Treaty of Service, and that treaty was signed in 1920, then this one in 1923. That's the New York Times from July of 1923. But this really sticks in Erdogan's craw because they had to give up a lot of territory, and he's been trying to get it back. And some of this are Kurdish regions, and some of this is the region down here. It's sort of the upper right-hand corner of the Mediterranean there. That's where the earthquake took place. And by the way, if you chart out the earthquakes above a certain percentage, there were like 7,700 of them, and you chart those out and it makes like a 7 on the map. It's probably just an accident, okay? Just weird things like that happen. So listen, there is so much to talk about that I'm not going to do. There was meetings this week between our Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, and the Israeli Defense Minister, Yoav Gallant. They met and they agreed we've got to make decisions on Iran soon. This is from the Al Akbar newspaper in Lebanon, talking about the peace arrangement between between Saudi Arabia and Iran. And look at the billboard picture. This is a billboard in Iran. And that's General Soleimani and some other people with, you always see there's a guy with a green what do they call it? Headscarf on. And I think it's the Mahdi. It's because they never show his face. That's not permitted. It's either Muhammad or the Mahdi, which they think is coming. And look at what they're longingly gazing at. So I go back to where I started in all of this, and what the guy said in Israel Hayom is, Jerusalem is pretty important, and the Temple Mount is really important. And that lines up with Bible prophecy. So listen, I'll put some of this into a midweek sometime this week. And a lot of things happening, right? So be wise, wise as serpents, harmless as doves in all of your interactions, because you need to act wisely in this day and age, because things are very volatile out there right now. And again, I'm not telling anybody go take everything you have out of the bank and buy this precious metal or that precious metal or that commodity or whatever. You have to decide what's best for you, but I think you need to sit down and think about it. So, but we know that, look, ultimately, after all this period of trouble and everything, we know Jesus comes back and sets up a kingdom. And we're going to be there for that and participate in that. So that's going to be great. But until then, there'll be some problems, big problems. I just don't think we're going back to anything resembling the normal days of 2019. So let's pray. Lord, we pray, Lord, that you will give us wisdom to act as people, redeemed people of God, who have the guidance of your word and the Holy Spirit to guide us in the way we act and conduct ourselves, and also give us opportunities to share the gospel with people, because that is really what people need more than anything right now, is that hope that comes from believing in Jesus Christ and the work that he did on the cross and his death, burial, resurrection, and his coming to rule from Jerusalem. Bless us this week in Jesus' name. Amen.